Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich regular meeting of Council on August 26th, 2025. We welcome everyone here today and all those watching on YouTube. The gallery is empty today. Roll call. I, Mayor Schwindt, am present and chairing this meeting. Councillor Bryant.
Present.
Councillor Cadeau.
Present.
Councillor Schwindt.
Present.
Councillor Burgess and Councillor Grant send their regrets. Before we get going on the agenda items, council needs to reconvene in open session. Can I have a motion to reconvene? Councillor Cadeau, Councillor Bryant, all those in favor, and that's carried. Let's start with a moment of silence, and perhaps in that moment we can ponder all the wildfires that are going on across Canada. I did look at a map of Canada with the wildfires on it, and it just looked like the whole country and most of North America was in flames. So sort of the effects of climate change and how that affects us in more ways than just rain and water and storms. So let's just take a moment of silence. Thank you. The Township of Woolwich acknowledges with deep respect that the land we call home has existed since time immemorial, long before our communities were formed and long before we arrived here. Indigenous peoples have had a deep and lasting relationship with this land, caring for it, learning from it, and living alongside all it sustains. We are grateful to the First Peoples who have lived on and cared for this land and who continue to do so today. And in particular, we recognize the Chinootan, also known as the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people. We honor their deep connection to this land, and we acknowledge their wisdom, resilience, and leadership. These communities have protected and cared for the land with respect, responsibility, and a sense of shared trust. As we move forward, we hope to build a future based on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and stronger relationships with one another. May we continue to learn together, to care for each other, and to honor all those who share this place with us. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there are no items to come forward from closed. We have no public meetings, and we have no presentations or delegations this evening. We do have some items on the consent agenda. Does anyone want to remove anything? No? Can I have a mover and a seconder for the consent agenda? Councillor Bryant, Councillor Schwindt, all those in favor? That is carried. There is no unfinished business, and we have one item, I think, on the council business, and that is alternative voting methods. Maybe we have two items. The first one is Clerk Smith on alternative voting methods.
Thank you, Mayor Schwindt, and through you to council. This report is the first voting method report that I'd like to bring you in preparation for the 2026 election. Staff have pulled up on the screen attachment 1 of that report there that I'll sort of walk you through. Essentially, the first method I've listed there is hand-counted paper ballots, and that is by default what is allowed under the Municipal Election Act. I've tried to summarize how I consider the elector experience, whether there's an in-person option, how it would be to manage that election, a rough estimate of the cost, and then how long it would take to provide results. So with hand-counted paper ballots, obviously it's familiar and convenient. It may be less accessible, but it is a very simple election to deliver. It is, of course, in person. From a management perspective, it may require more part-time staff and may be harder to manage, which is partly why I typically recommend combining with another option. The cost is around medium, and the results are, I would say, slow, In a previous report, I suggested to council 4 years ago that it would be medium, taking about 60 minutes, but my experience last year was actually that it took a little bit longer, about 1 to 3 hours after the polls close. So the hand-counted paper ballot option is the default, but there's some other methods that I think we should consider. Last election, we used the internet voting method, or we provided that option for voters. It was the most used method, and in our post-election survey, 94% of people who responded said they supported that method going forward in the future. From an elector experience perspective, I find it accessible, convenient, and familiar. It is not in person, but it does. We do offer support at help centers, and it's typically fewer part-time staff to manage and easier to manage. The cost is relatively low compared to other methods, and the results are fast. The other one that I'd like to highlight here is the tabulator counted paper ballots. So last election, I did not recommend using tabulator counters. Although it's familiar and convenient for voters, and it can be more accessible with additional features that you can purchase, it can be more difficult to manage, and it could require more staff time. The cost is usually substantially higher, and but results can be more in that medium speed range. There's also the phone voting method, the in-person touchscreen voting method, and vote by mail. Really, I'm not recommending those options, although I'm happy to answer questions about those. What the report recommends essentially is for asking council to give me direction to go out for RFP for internet voting, as well as test the market for tabulator counted paper ballots. And what I'm starting to see, just kind of keeping an eye on the market, is that there are voting companies that are providing both internet and tabulator as a bundle, and putting those services together often results in some savings. So really, again, what I'm asking for council is support for me to go ahead, test the market for internet, see what the tabulator counted paper ballots pricing comes back, and then we can make a final decision at a future date. There's a lot of background in the report, and I've attached the 2 evaluation reports that I've done post-election that includes a lot more statistics. And of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions on those or the voting methods that are in front of you.
Okay. Councillor Bryant. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you to Jeff. With the increasing number of seniors, did we get a lot of seniors doing in-person voting, or were they computer savvy, I guess?
Through you, Mayor Shantz, it's a good question. What the research shows in general is that it does not, the type of people who vote don't change based on the voting method. So if you, and in 2018, we did only offer remote options, phone and internet. The demographics of our voters didn't change. There was still a lot of seniors that voted, and that's sort of typical in Ontario elections that, you know, the highest turnout is among usually older crowds. I think, if anything, what happened when we transitioned from internet voting to both internet and paper, anyone that wasn't necessarily comfortable with the internet or just preferred a paper ballot, you know, marking that physical piece of paper and seeing it put in the ballot box, they may have selected that method that was either most convenient or accessible or preferred for them. And then offering the internet voting probably would have you know, helped families that were busy or people that were out of town, or you know, anyone that's just really comfortable with a computer and wants a fast and easy method to cast their ballot.
Okay, I'll think about this more.
Through you, Mayor, to Clerk Smith. Looking at the report that you included in the package, it was from the 2022 election. It had a graph in there that looked at votes by dates and locations. I noticed that we did do phone for the previous election, and it looks like there was less than, I'm going to guess, 50 people throughout the entire duration. I'm wondering what the cost was for the phone. I don't know if you would have that specifically, because I'm of the opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you decided not to go with the phone because it was such low uptake.
Yeah, so again, through you, The phone method, I wouldn't know the cost. Oh, well, I couldn't break out the cost because it was included with the internet system that we purchased, or the vendor that provided that last time. This time around, I'm finding more and more vendors are not necessarily bundling the phone with internet voting. So it could be an additional cost. And if we went out and council wanted me to look for pricing for internet, phone, and tabulators, I could look for all three. My guess is that it would decrease the number of vendors I get bidding, and it could also increase the price. I can tell you that it was a method that wasn't well used. It's funny with the phone system, we had people reporting in the survey after that it was both too slow and too fast. So if you're fast with the phone, then it was too slow for you. And if you wanted more time, it was too fast for you. So it's really hard to sort of get that exactly right. From an election management point of view, it's also very difficult to get proper pronunciations, doing all the extra programming that's involved in the phone. And, you know, as you pointed out, I would argue it didn't have a whole lot of uptake. If you do look in my, my report from this year, you can see that from 2018, when we didn't offer paper ballots, to 2022, when we did, the phone system use dropped off quite a bit. And again, I think there are some people that either aren't comfortable using the internet or maybe aren't supportive of that voting method. I think if you give them alternatives, those are the people that would probably go to the alternative. My guess is that what happened, and I think the statistics kind of show this, is that internet was still a very widely used and the most used voting method. But most of the people that maybe weren't comfortable with internet that would have used phone in 2018, that number was cut in half and more people went to paper ballots.
I think if I recall too, in 2018, we had a little trouble with the internet. I think that was our first year with internet voting. And the system got overloaded. They didn't anticipate everybody going at the last minute. And so I don't know if that would have created an uptick in phone or not, but it may have.
So you are correct, Mayor Shantz. However, the phone system and the internet system were both connected, so they were both down at the same time, or slow at the same time, I should say.
Councillor Schwindt.
Yep, on the internet, it seems like a no-brainer. People aren't comfortable with the internet. Their default is they like to go in person, if at all possible. I guess I was a little bit surprised you had tabulator kind of paper ballots as more preferred to in-screen, touch-screen voting. To me, once a person's there, I don't think they care if it's a touch screen or a paper. And I guess intuitively, I think we're getting more comfortable with technology in person. So I wouldn't want to rule that one out yet. I think it might be a worthwhile option instead of the paper ballots.
Through Mayor Shantz, there's a few different options for this. There are some companies that offer only touchscreen voting. Sometimes they're not connected to the internet at all. So it's just a simple, you know, you come in and everything's sort of self-contained in the voting place, not connected to an outside internet system, and you vote on the touch screen. One thing we did do in both, well, actually, sorry, in 2018, one of my experiences was that people who use the internet, when you gave them, especially people that weren't comfortable using a computer, when you gave them a mouse and a laptop, is what we used the first election, they were struggling with using the mouse and wanted to touch a screen. So in 2022, we used iPads for all our help centers for people that wanted to come in and use the internet but get help. And that was actually, we had quite a lot more uptake and people found that a lot more user-friendly. So I guess the question is, from an in-person touchscreen option, we can do the whole completely separate from the internet, offline, that, you know, level of security, so to speak. Or we can still do help centers with essentially iPads, where people can use it as a touchscreen voting in a voting place. Are you sort of more in that sort of completely separate offline, or are you just looking for a help center with a touchscreen option?
I guess to be honest, I'm ambivalent on that. just having a place for people to go, I think gives a certain demographic that security and how they want to vote. So how I don't think it matters.
And I think we can make that happen.
I think too, there's a demographic or a group of people who still want that paper. And to know that I put my mark on and I put it in the box. I've heard that kind of feedback at different times as well. I think particularly, was it the last election where it was all paper? I think not ours, but the federal election, I guess, I think was all paper, and yeah, some people really liked that. Bonnie and Councillor Bryant and then Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you. Do we have the ability to help people that want to do a touchscreen but aren't familiar? Because quite often you're not supposed to have somebody else in their ballot box when they're marking their choices. So do we have people that can help people that require help without causing issues?
So two options for that. The first one is all of our election officials are sworn to secrecy. They can help people vote. And there are some people that would, whether you're using, say, an iPad at a voting place or even a piece of paper, will ask for help, and the election official will help them through the entire voting process. The other thing I think is more directly to your question is when we were helping people with an iPad use the internet voting system, a lot of people want help putting in their credentials, getting through the first screen, and we would find that you could say, okay, now here's your first choice, it's for mayor. You know, there's last election there were 2 options for mayor, and if you're comfortable now, I can leave you. You can finish your voting, you know, privately, and we can come back if you have any questions. And that was sort of the level of help that a lot of people wanted.
Thank you. Not meaning to torpedo this conversation. It's not my intention. The number that caught me off guard, though, and I know that we've seen this before, but it's the 34.7 voter turnout. Now, I know that we're not discussing voter turnout tonight. Maybe we can consider it a challenge. How can we increase that? Has clerks or corporate put any consideration into what they may do for the next election cycle to try to get that 34 up a little bit? I mean, mind you, 34.7 is better than 31.3, which was the prior cycle. So just throwing that out there.
Oh, I could talk about this for hours. How long do you want to be here tonight, Council? A few things. I think, you know, first of all, that there is a demographic in Woolwich that doesn't vote for religious reasons, and I think we know that. So, you know, we should keep that in mind when we're looking at statistics. I think also when you look at municipal elections, they are typically lower than provincial, which is typically lower than federal, and that we've sort of seen over many, many years. I would love to do as much work as I could on increasing voter turnout. One of my biggest goals, time permitting, I would say, would be working on increasing turnout, particularly amongst younger voters. If you look at the demographics from the past 2 elections, the younger voters, I mean, I think sometimes internet voting, they say, oh, none of the older demographic are going to vote, and there's going to be a huge influx of 18 to 25-year-olds, and that just isn't the case. So I think we do need to reach out to younger voters. I'd love to do a program with the local high schools, see if we can get some more youth engaged and talking to their friends, talking to their parents. So that would be my priority in terms of turnout. The other things, and I've been to conferences and trying to brainstorm ideas of how to do this. You know, there's a lot of people that will say, you know, just throw advertising at the problem, advertising dollars at the problem. And, you know, each year we try to do better advertising, getting the message out. Of course, anyone on going door to door does a lot of that work for us, so that's excellent. But it's funny, after every election, I usually get a call saying, oh, when are we supposed to vote? And you know, sorry, that was 2 weeks ago. So I guess it's a challenge. I don't have all the answers for that, but It is something I want to focus on, and it's something I will keep in the back of my mind.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. There's a recommendation there. Does someone want to move it? Councillor Schwindt, Councillor Bryant, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Our second item is Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. This is the strong mayor's recommendation where I just want to put the motion forward because I think what we're seeing happen to me is an erosion of our democracy by putting too much power in one person's hand. And I don't mean this as an attack on anybody individually, but I really feel we are supposed to be a democracy and we should be conducting our business in a democratic fashion, which means everyone should be voting on it, not just one individual determining how things are going to be run in a township. So that's the purpose behind this motion. And there's many other communities that have adopted similar type motions and forwarded them to the province. So that's the reason for bringing this forward.
And so you're moving it.
I am moving it, yes. And looking
Councillor
forward.
Cadeau, you're seconding?
Yeah, I will second this, and I just want to note, you know, appreciation for the way in which this was framed. I think that it could have gone one of two ways, and the way in which it was framed in, you know, acknowledging that these powers have been thrust upon us, but wanting empirical evidence as to its efficacy, I think is an important feature that may have been overlooked slightly. So just calling on the province to add some of that, you know, feedback mechanism, I think is important. So thank you for the heavy lifting on this.
Okay, all those in favor? That's carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. We have bylaws. Let me turn my page. For the bylaws, motion for the bylaws listed on the agenda. And they are to designating Mary Hill Road, a couple of items, I think those are the Catholic churches, right?
Yes.
Yes, in Mary Hill for cultural heritage value, and appointing officers of the Corporation of the Township, a bylaw to lift reserves and to confirm all actions. Moved by Councillor Bryant, seconded by Councillor Cadeau. All those in favor, and that's carried. Thank you. That concludes the council portion of the meeting. We'll take a quick 5-minute recess and we will be back to start Committee of the Whole, chaired by Councillor Schwindt.
turn the microphone on, be better. Good evening. We're now meeting as Committee of the Whole for items that require more debate and discussion. We'll not be making any final decisions on these items, but proposing recommendations for the next council meeting. If anyone in the community has feedback on these recommendations, we encourage you to reach out to staff or council or submit comments to council before a decision is made in 2 weeks' time. Starting out under our quarterly report for the second quarter, our Director of Finance, Social Services and Treasurer, Colin, to present the staff report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Schwindt, to the rest of council. I'm just sharing my screen here. So I want to go through some of the highlights on the Q2 report. Just for council's awareness, the next council meeting will be talking about budget parameters. So we thought it would be best to talk about the Q2 report separately from the budget parameters report, just so you have a better context going into the 2026 budget parameters discussion. So similar to the Q1 report that we discussed, the ongoing issue is the winter control variance, and we've come up with a number of mitigation measures. I'd just like to go through a few slides just to remind council of the current deficits and some of the history around the financial reporting. So for the last few years, we've had a number of deficits. So it's ranged from slight deficits in 2022, a moderate surplus in 2023, and then a much larger surplus in 2024. And then we're projecting a much larger surplus again in 2025. The 2025 deficit, sorry, I'm sorry, deficit, thank you. Very sorry there. Just to be clear, it is a deficit that we're projecting for 2025. And I just wanted to also give a little bit more context as well. So the numbers in the blue here are the deficits that I just showed and some of the surpluses. But the orange bars, if you include or if you exclude the investment, external surplus investment returns that we received in both 2023 and 2024, you can see that it goes from a surplus in 2023 to a deficit. So the actual operating deficit was present in 2023, 2022, 2024, and again in 2025. It's just that the investment returns, because we had a very strong interest rate environment, was kind of hiding some of those operating deficits. So the biggest driver of this current deficit is winter control, and that was very consistent with the Q1 report. There hasn't been any real changes to the projected deficit in winter control because we haven't really had any additional expenses in winter control. But we did go back and do a quick analysis of the budget variances that we've had in winter control over the past 6 years. So they've ranged from a deficit of $300,000 in 2019, smaller deficits in 2020, 2021, and then an over $400,000 deficit in 2022. And then you'll notice too in 2023 and 2024, they're very small lines, which indicates we're essentially right on budget. But if council will remember the very mild winter we had in 2024, most of the snow was really essentially gone in February. I would have expected to see a much larger surplus that would have been able to offset the variance. And then, of course, in 2025, as previously reported, we're expecting a considerable variance. We're over around 450 to 500,000 so far, and we still have November 2025 and December 2025 to come. So based on historical averages, we're expecting it could be up to $750,000, which works out roughly to about a 5% tax impact. So I was doing a little bit more analysis, and I asked a number of colleagues in other municipalities if they were experiencing a very similar winter control deficit. So we all know the winter that we had in early 2025, and most other municipalities were also experiencing a very similar deficit. What you see on the screen here is just a snip from the City of Waterloo's variance report. So the City of Waterloo has a population of roughly 130,000. So they're tracking a deficit of $339,000. So our winter control deficit is projecting roughly twice as much as the City of Waterloo. The other item that you'll notice in here, they go through and say that most of the costs they're expecting to be covered by the winter control reserve. So they have a winter control reserve that's going to offset their projected variance. And in 2024, they had a surplus of 550,000. So again, going back to that previous graph, they had a very large surplus in 2024, which they were able to offset and put into a reserve, which then they had a lower winter maintenance deficit in 2025. So the conclusion I'm coming to as well is I believe it's also a budget related issue, not just a cost related issue, that we're not budgeting sufficiently for winter control, and that's been the case for over 5 years now. Even in the mildest winters, we still didn't have a surplus, and then we're running the risk in the very extreme weather events that we're essentially absorbing all of those costs, and we don't have the winter control reserve in order to fund that. So one thing we're starting to look at a little bit more deeply is looking at our budget development and the cost allocations related to the budget development to making sure that we have the right budgets for the right areas. So winter control is the big issue right now. But I believe there's other areas that we need to do a deeper dive essentially on cost allocations. This is just a quick methodology of one way you can identify costs and build a budget. But I don't think we've done that kind of deep dive on a lot of our budgets. So we've just been hiding some of these overages that have existed for many years, but they've been offset by other surpluses in other areas. So what we're trying to do is get a more accurate reflection of what should be in our budget and what the actual costs are. So looking at mitigation measures, so the winter control deficit is roughly 750,000. That's what we're estimating for the end of the year. So there was potential reductions that the infrastructure services group offered, and there were reductions in roadside, hardtop, and safety. So those are reductions to their infrastructure services area. There was about $10,000 in other savings that we found throughout the organization. Recreation and community services found around $90,000 related to staff gapping. A big chunk of that is the current vacancy that we have with the Director of Recreation. So there's a potential savings there as well as some other vacancies. And I reported to council in a previous meeting that we have surplus rental income related to the 22 Church Street property. We're still receiving rental income for the home hardware property and the Elmira Donuts and Deli. So that wasn't budgeted. That was just essentially extra revenue that we weren't really expecting. So that's additional revenue that's unbudgeted, which will offset some of that winter control ultimate variance that falls to the bottom line. Having said that, those are just the ones that we're well aware of. There's other potential impacts. We don't know exactly how the end of the year is going to go. There could be potential overtime impacts. Right now, we're not showing those in the budget. And in our current system, it's very difficult to report on overtime and pull up the overtime reports. So it could be that overtime could potentially have another impact on this. There's a recent market adjustment in the union agreement, wasn't necessarily budgeted for, so that could have a negative impact also on the projected year-end variance. We're not seeing anything right now, but these are just potential impacts. Council may be aware of the carbon tax that was reduced off a lot of energy costs. So we're actually having a cost savings. So we're below budget or tracking below budget in utilities related to some of the carbon tax. So that could offset some of these other areas. I mentioned before, investment income tends to be above budget. We've actually received more investment income, and we're still in a high rate interest environment. So I do expect still investment income to be above average, and that could also offset some of the variances. We do still have salary gapping and other vacancies that we don't budget for essentially. So there could be savings as well related to salary gapping. It is very difficult to predict exactly how much we're going to save there. And then the other side of things that related to some of these cost allocations, there could be a larger deficit once we really go through and we find all the other cost allocations and we kind of understand these. And just so council kind of just have an understanding of some of the way we do cost allocations, it's a very manual process. I have here just 1 week of daily cost allocations, and it's a pen and paper that we do kind of, that all the supervisors fill in. It's very time intensive. And I don't really believe it's giving us accurate costing. So it's a lot of kind of inefficient work. So we're looking at a lot of these processes as we look at our new system and look at some of these cost allocations and looking at our 2026 budget. Other potential areas that we could use to fund this variance are potential service level reductions. And that's again at the will of council if there's any direction to reduce potential service levels. The option is always there for contingency reserves to use that, whatever's that remainder is from our operating contingency reserves. I do have there, it's limited, it's not a bottomless amount. We're using the Innova dividend essentially to top up our contingency reserves. And then there's the other option really is to reduce our capital projects. So we could, put a pause on projects and use any of those tax funded dollars to offset the variance. The other issue, and I won't go into too much detail about this because there is going to be a report coming to council in the next 2 weeks. Utilities, as far as the Q2 report, is tracking very similar to the previous years. So council will be well aware that we're tracking deficits in the utility budgets. We're hoping that some of the measures that we've taken over the past 6 months will bear fruit, but as of Q2, the most recent financial reports, we were still projecting significant deficits in both water and wastewater. Again, this is hopefully worst case scenario that some of these other revenue issues will mitigate some of that, but just for council's awareness that it's still a concern. So again, more for next meeting to really go through a lot of this, but some of the things that we're looking at is water meter replacements and making sure that we're replacing our water meters. We have water meters in our GIS layer, so we have better data from that. We're looking at the auto flushers and seeing if there's potential cost recoveries from some of those. Again, I talked a little bit more about internal cost allocations, just making sure we have the right costs allocated to the right areas. More fundamentally, I think we need to do a really deeper dive on our water wastewater rate model. That hasn't really been looked at, from what I can tell, in probably over 20 years. So just the way we build our rates and we come up with all of the costs to put in there, and that'll also be in part of the report as well, to maybe we need to do some tweaking and deeper dives on the rate model. And then just putting a little bit more about comparative costs and cost analysis, like what do we spend versus other municipalities? Do we have higher costs, lower revenues, different fees, and just doing some more kind of comparative analysis. So kind of some of the conclusions, the key takeaways for this report, but also going into real budget parameters. We still really need to look a little bit more of budget development, really understanding what's going into our budgets. My biggest challenge and wish is not to have these deficits repeat next year. I want to end this and making sure we have the right budgets for the right amounts. So because we're continuing these tax supported and utility deficits, and I know council have been putting quite a number of rate and tax increases, and want to make sure that we're still not running deficits despite kind of large increases. Utility deficits will be just at the next meeting. One thing that's an ongoing item is the reserves. If we had sufficient winter control reserves, this would be less of an issue. We wouldn't have to find some of the mitigation measures. So building up some of those reserves is going to be an important item. And then having a deeper review of costing, again, just to make sure that going into budget 2026, we're very confident on the numbers that are going into the budgets. I don't want to be sitting here this time next year and talking about more deficits, but it is going to be a multi-year, it's a long-term financial improvement journey. A lot of these don't have quick answers. It takes a long time to really get to the bottom of some of these issues, but it is. I do believe we're making progress. It's just a lot of work to really peel away the onion, so to speak. And so that's kind of the key highlights in the Q2 report, and I'll just leave that for any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Lynn. I'll open up for questions. Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Can you help me understand a very big picture. When I go to the bottom of the statements and it says net township operating, it shows the variance at 49.4%, which is about 50%, and we're 50% through the year. Where's the big deficit?
Through you, Chair Schwindt, that's a great question. And so that's a good indicator of roughly, if we're at 47%, we should be halfway through the year. We should be spending roughly 50% of budgets. This gets into something we call calendarization or seasonality of budgets. So winter control is a perfect example. Most of the budget in winter control is January, February, and March of a certain year. So you would expect actually 75% of the winter control budget to be spent in the first quarter. So there's a lot, that's just one example. Another example is splash pads, for example. The Q2 report just goes to the end of June, so we would have very little spending in splash pads in the Q2 report. So you would expect most of the spending to happen later on in the year. A lot of the work like operations and some of the road work, a lot of the construction, tree planting, grass trimming, most of that happens in the later part of the year. So you would expect to spend most of that budget in the later part of the year. Best practice is to do kind of more of that seasonality to say this budget should be spread either equally over 12 months, more at the first half, more at the second half. That's really more budget software, and it gets you a better understanding of where we should be with that. The way we try to do most of the variances, that's why you see most of it's on tracking on budget, because we don't have that level of detail. But if there's something that we know that we spend most of it in the later part of the year, and we have lots of the money remaining, we do some kind of historical analysis to say, when did we usually spend most of the money for the year? So it's a rough guide, essentially that 47%, but it's a great question because I asked the same thing when I started.
So if I could just follow up on that, winter control is mostly done. We want to hope we're not going to get a lot of snow in November, December. Although I read a little blurb about the Farmer's Almanac that thinks we're going to get most of our snow in December, which didn't make me happy. But is there, do you have last year's numbers, I guess, to compare what was our variance in June last year? Can you see that easily?
Through you, Chair Schwindt, we do have that. That's essentially how I predicted the 750,000 variance for winter control. I didn't do it for every line item, but essentially what we did is, as of Q2 last year, what did we spend between now and the end of the year in 2024? And then if we added that amount to the amount that we've already spent in 2025, that's how we get to the $750,000 projection in winter control. I think I have to just scroll down to the statements, but I believe we're somewhere around 450,000 right now. And as of last year, we spent another roughly 300,000. So if we spend another 300,000 this year to the end of the year, that's how we get from the 450 to the 750 as a projection.
Okay, that's helpful. So we're just at this point, we're overspent 450 in winter control. Was it last December that was really snowy? I can never remember year to year. There was one year where we had a ton of snow in December in the last couple of years. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We could get that again. Okay.
And just through you, Chair Schwindt, to Mayor Shantz, we did do an analysis. I'm just seeing if I can pull it up, if it's in my recent files. Because I think it'll also help answer some of your questions. So historically, in 2021, by this time, the second quarter, we've spent 70% of our winter control budget. In 2022, we spent 76% of our winter control budget. In 2023, we spent 83% of our winter control budget. That means that we had a very light kind of December. So that kind of, and then in 2024, we only spent 65% of our budget by this time. So we did have it seems like we had a very rough December. Again, winter's very difficult to predict, but if the 4-year average on that is 73% of the average winter control budget would be spent by this time this year. So another 27% of the budget would be spent for the next 2 months or the last 2 months of the year.
Okay, that context is helpful for us, I think. Do you have those same numbers for the net operating?
Through you, Chair Schwinn, I don't have it right now, but I can definitely get that, and especially for budget parameters for in 2 weeks, I can get some of that detail.
I think it would be helpful to know if 49.4% is where we usually are at this time of year.
A little bit worried moving on from winter control yet because we haven't addressed the shortfall or made a plan, and we're almost at that winter season coming up. So I think, Mr. Lynn, you had a spreadsheet that showed some recommended savings and options, but I thought we were still short a couple $100,000 in terms of budget shortfall.
Not if you use operating contingency.
How much operating contingency is there?
Through you, Chair Schwinn. So based on all the current mitigation measures, we would still need another $336,000. Again, it's very difficult to predict. It could be 250,000, it could be 400,000. I like to err on the side of caution, so I'm hopeful that it will come in under that. We do have enough in the operating contingency reserve because we have the Innova dividend, and it's roughly 600,000. It's a little bit more than 600,000 that we get as a surplus dividend, but this will be the last year that we have that Innova dividend, so it is kind of one time in nature. We got that same surplus dividend last year in the 2024 budget year, and there'll be a report coming next council talking about the 2024 deficit, last year's deficit, as you will recall, and I showed here. It's roughly 450,000. So we have to use most of the operating contingency that we had to pay for last year's shortfall. We do have another 600,000 coming in that could potentially cover this shortfall, but again, it's leaving us very limited room in our operating contingency.
Mr. Benjamin.
Yeah, through you, Councillor Schwindt. Again, just to deal with your question here and
Our apologies for the technical difficulties. We're now back resuming our committee of the whole session. Mr. Brenneman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I was about to outline was the following, is that following the Q1 presentation, council's instructions was to look at opportunities to find mitigation, reductions in budget, et cetera, to help with savings. And as well, council also looked, and you would have seen in Director Lynn's presentation, also to talk about potential winter control service level reduction standards. And it's one of the things we want to get direction as to whether there is still a need to spend the time and effort, or whether there is no interest in that. But to Councillor Schwindt's question, is that, as you've heard reported tonight, currently things sit at a certain number. And Director Lynn has projected out, based on past winter control experiences, what it likely could be if we have a reasonable winter as we've had in the past. The realities with that, though, to Councillor Schwindt's point, is with our normal practices, first we look at the department and what they can do to help mitigate the situation. Then we turn to the other departments, et cetera. But then to Director Lynn's point, it's common, and again, we don't have as deep maybe as some cities or other area municipalities, but the other thing is, if you can't mitigate it completely within the existing operating, then you look at your reserves, like the operating contingency reserve. So I think what we could do, Councillor Schwindt, and to the rest of council, is understand tonight where you stand relative to the actual deficit as it stands now, what Director Lynn showed you in terms of the department mitigations, and what could be taken from operating contingency. However, one of the other things that he did put also in a slide you would have seen is it is conceivable too, if you still want us to explore more, is any potential pauses on any capital projects. That may or may not be difficult, depending on the status of where things are at with respect to tender awards and things of that nature. But what we did do, as per the ask, was sit down with each department. Where can we find some savings to first mitigate, so that we're not just going to the operating contingency? That's a normal best practice, to find what you can. So we found that within the operating. And then the only other thing I want to go back to again is to say, before we do a lot more work, there would be opportunities if our Director of Infrastructure Services tonight to say, yes, we could look at service level standard changes in terms of which roads received higher treatment and lower treatment, depending on the response time, in terms of number of hours, in terms of dealing with response to winter control situations. But again, we only want to do a deep dive on that if there is in fact an appetite at this stage to look at winter control service level standard reductions, because we realize that in itself could be sensitive as well.
Thank you. Before you jump in, Councillor Bryant, I guess the question I have is, when you look at departmental savings, I'm a little bit concerned that we are saving $100,000 in hardtop. I don't know if that's treatment or repairs or what. Our roads are not stellar to begin with right now, and we've gone taking more money out of that budget. I guess partway through the year, that's a concern of mine. I do know there's staff gappings in that department. Have we quantified any savings that may result in? Is that an area of savings? And then the third area, there was a huge, I guess, project at St. Jacobs Arena. We didn't receive funding for it, so I believe that project's on hold. What was township contribution there, and would that be a possible source of savings?
Through you, Chair Schwindt, just to go through the list, I really can't comment on the service level impacts on the infrastructure services group with the reduction in, say, hardtop and what that would actually look like. They suggested that. So maybe we just wait until Director Poupet returns for the next one. Staff gapping, I don't believe they've actually incorporated the staff gapping. They did mention that staff gapping, say, for the operations supervisor. But I think that was all part of this is what we're suggesting for reductions in that total 200,000-ish that they included. They didn't include a specific number for that. I think was kind of more of an all-in type of number. Again, he would be the best person to ask. If I have some time, I can look into the funding for the St. Jacobs Arena. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look into it. And if we have time, hopefully answer the question now, or if not, get back to you for the St. Jacobs Arena.
Thanks. I jumped in. Sorry, Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Through you to Director Lynn. How much do we have in our reserves?
Through you, Chair Schwindt, to Councillor Bryant, it is a very, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's very difficult to forecast our current state of our reserves. We don't have real-time reserve reporting, so that means I don't know exactly. I know the year-end reserve position because we just did our financial statements, so I know what they are at the end of 2024. I know what we budgeted to do in 2025, which was essentially a draw on all of those reserves, and that's where we had that's where we have in the budget. What we found is roughly 50%, 50 to 60% of projects actually get done from the capital side, but I don't know at this point which capital projects will get done and which ones won't. So I have to assume at this point that all capital projects will be a draw on those reserves, the various capital infrastructure tax levy type of reserves. Probably closer to the end of the year, we could do more of an exercise to know what projects won't be completed and then how much we would be putting back into reserves, or again, to Councillor Schwindt's point, which projects that we're not going to do, and that could potentially be a source of funding for this winter control variance. I do want to move more towards that real-time reserve reporting, but it's going to require more of a change in our financial structure and our systems to do that.
Thank you.
If that was going to be one of my questions, so then it was for the budgeted parameters meeting in September. It's hard for us to give parameters if we don't know where we're starting from. So would it be possible to do a reserve balance presentation of where we're at by pot, so to speak, and have some sort of a summary from each department on what their capital forecast is for the rest of the year? To give us a good starting point. I know earlier in the summer you spent some time giving me a budgeting 101 course, which is very helpful, but I think all the council and the public would benefit from understanding our true financial position. And then I'm going to also ask about the utilities. I know you said there'd be a utilities update at the September meeting. And my understanding is there's been some significant one-time opportunities or savings or solutions found. During that presentation, can you pull out the effects of those one-time or one-item events and show what an ongoing budget will look like for the department? My fear is we're projecting $1 million deficit. We're going to find $500,000 in savings, but find their one-year things. And 12 months from now, we're back in another deficit position. So I'd like to understand what's one time and what's ongoing. That's doable in the report.
Through you, Chair Schwinn, yes, we could look at that. One of the items, and we've seen this in the past, is these one-time savings, say from a large customer that we're doing, say, catch-up billings for. It's not a single year of savings. It could be 3 or 4 years. So it's actually it should be offsetting, say, 2022 deficit, 2023 deficit, 2024, but it's all being recognized then in the current year. So doing some kind of annualization to say what is then still the true deficit, just backing out, say, the historic years, and we could do something like that for the next report.
I think that's really important for us to understand going forward. Other questions? And anything else council would like for that budget parameters report? So I think that could be a very involved conversation in a couple weeks' time. Not seeing any. I will carry on the agenda. Thank you. Mr. Lynn. Next up, we have other business, the mayor's report on regional matters. Sorry.
Getting through that agenda so quick. Regional matters, David, Eric and I just came back from AMO and had, I attended a number of delegations with the region, and a couple on behalf of the township. I don't know if you want to know what I went to. I can tell you, met with Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and had a chance to talk to Minister Flack just really briefly at the end of it about our needs for infrastructure in Breslau. And I think that went well. I talked particularly about that infrastructure opening up the economic piece of for Conestoga Meats and also for the airport. And we had a number of delegations where that was either mentioned sort of as a quick insert. We had 15 minutes for each delegation, so it's not much time. Or it was the whole delegation that we did. What else did we do? Minister of the Attorney General was for judicial backlog at the courts. So we talked to them about that. We talked about our need for runway extensions in the hangar development areas at the airport. There was another one on municipal sustainability and specifically outdated revenue tools and how we can maybe not. Well, we did bring some options for cost sharing and that kind of thing. So we talked about that. A specific one for us was we met with the parliamentary assistant for Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Gaming to talk about library services. And our ask there was right now, the township libraries are embedded in the Municipal Act from way back in 1973. And we're the only municipality that is embedded in the Municipal Act. So we asked to find a way to remove us from that constraint so that if down the road we want to have our own library system, we're free to do that without being encumbered. So that was specific to us. I didn't get to that one. I didn't get to this one either, but there was one talking about the centralizing the ambulance communication center as well, along with the police communications and bringing that more local. We had one on procurement of new trains, just all kinds of exciting things, right? And rural transit strategy. So that was a combined, so we had 15 minutes. Waterloo had part of that time to talk about some Waterloo issues, and the region had a very little time to talk very briefly about rural transit and how we get some support for that. I don't know, David and Eric, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, some of this, through you, Mr. Chair, some of this might be repetitious, or at least on one item, but just going to go through the list. So for this particular AMO, we had a number of we had a number of joint delegations. The first one that comes to mind is that we had a joint delegation with Kitchener and Guelph with the province on Highway 7 and the importance of completing that. That's a project that everyone's very familiar with, I'm sure. The other thing as well is that the townships had a joint delegation with the region, with the province with respect to the implementation of the rural transit strategy and the need for funding to be able to support the implementation of that. The mayor mentioned the 4 townships joint delegation on library governance. Excuse me. So that was covered off by the mayor. And then, as we've talked about too in passing tonight, our MPP had a very quick, short opportunity for us to meet with Minister Surma with respect to the importance of the East Side lands and Breslau. And then we also had our scheduled 15-minute delegation with the parliamentary assistants Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and we're able to do a full presentation with respect to that. And, you know, I think one of the learnings that we had coming out of that was we need to continue to do the advocacy at various levels of government. And I would add that this afternoon, the mayor and I had an opportunity with our MP to talk about any federal opportunities to be able to support the East Side and the Breslau. But I think the key thing out of all of this, especially I'll stick with the East Side and the Breslau, is we need to continue the advocacy. We need to continue the meetings post AMO, and certainly that will involve, because of the airport, you know, the region. And I think we had an opportunity as well at our one delegation to have the region there, and also Tony Lamantia from the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corp, WEDC. So I think that's important as well, you know, to be able to show the collaboration and the partnerships that we're trying to achieve, and that usually bodes well for hopefully accessing funding. The other thing I would say is, I think one of the key themes that emerged in terms of the feedback that we've received is, you know, because we had mentioned to at the various delegations on the East Side and Breslau that we're disheartened because of the fact that we see, you know, many other municipalities receiving housing enabling funding. And one of the pieces of feedback that was provided at both the meeting we had with Minister Surma and also the parliamentary assistant is obviously the first phase of the East Side is about employment lands, Conestoga Meats, and the airport. And so therefore, it's not necessarily about, in a black and white way, how many housing units are going to come on tomorrow. Like some applications would say, hey, if you give us this funding, we can build 3,000 homes over the next 5-year period or whatever the case may be. So, we are encouraged as well perhaps to rethink or relook at how we approach our advocacy, and look at things, perhaps initially in the first phase as the importance of the economic development and the airport, in terms of how we reframe what our ask is of both the province and even now the federal government. So those are my comments there. The last thing I would say though is that I also am going to take, because it will take a little bit more time to work with Councillor Schwindt and Mayor Schantz. There also was, because we had only a focused number of delegations, I spoke to opportunities for once at the conference to be able to attend some of the concurrent sessions. I think it would be nice to share, what some of the learnings to bring back there in terms of things that were part of the workshops that were part of the conference as well. But today we figured we could do a very quick job of saying, here's what came out of the delegations and the advocacy, but there was also learning and growth opportunities from a professional development standpoint through the attendance at some workshops.
And for myself, as my first attendance at AMO, it was interesting to learn and talked to different people who have very similar challenges to us as Woolwich. Definitely the province is singularly focused on housing. And Housing Enabling Fund, that Premier announced $1.6 billion in new funding for that program for housing. We have to figure out how to massage our applications to meet those goals and carve out the economic ones and put that in a different pot. Did strike home to me, and the Premier said, as townships, we want this growth and we should be happy to get half a loaf rather than a full loaf when it came to DCs. And I don't think his math is too good there, because we might be better off economically with no loaf rather than half a loaf. So we have to figure out how to be sustainable as a township. But that's conversations that will be ongoing. As Mr. Brenneman said, we have to work on our lobbying effort. Definitely, I thought we'd buy-in from ministers. Definitely Mr. Harris is championing our cause. We saw Minister Flack at the one reception. He knew all about Breslau Conestoga meets, seemed supportive. We've got to enhance that and have more meetings going forward. And personally, it was also interesting one night talk to or listen to our former mayor and regional chair, Ken Sealing, who was there, and kind of get his historical take on the township and the region and how decisions have been made for the last number of years. So definitely worthwhile attending. I urge anybody on council to attend at some point in the future. It is worthwhile, maybe not every year, but it's a one-off. It was time well spent. Your shots?
Yeah, just as you were talking, I would add that one of my takeaways was we need to ensure that we're looking at all possibilities to look for funding, because we've applied for HUSIT 3 times and been turned down. And when the whole picture was shown to more than one minister, to a couple of the ministers, they said, wow, this is really more than any one tranche or any one silo. And so I think we need to be a little more attentive to that too, and how we apply for the funding.
Any other council reports or updates? Not seeing any. We'll move down to airport tours and training. Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I became aware that the region is looking at hosting a training session about the airport, and I know our council has asked staff to come away and try to develop a training session specifically for this council that would be a tour of the airport and a roads tour. So what I just want some feedback on is if council would still like a township tour of the airport, again combined with a roads tour, and I think the focus of that tour was going to be more in the Breslau area, East Side Lands area, kind of focused on growth and development. Or if you'd like if you'd like staff to stop that planning work and just go on a regional training session.
Thank you. Through you to the clerk. I think the township tour of the region and the airport would be a good idea. They need to understand what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and see it in person. Looking at it on paper just doesn't explain what's going to happen. They need to see it. And I fully encourage us to move forward with that.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not available the day that the region has proposed for the tour, which is unfortunate. So if we could move forward with a township one, that would be appreciated.
That works for staff.
Yes, thank you. We'll keep planning the township airport tour, and then along with a roads tour and a tour of the development areas.
Okay, moving down the list, outstanding activity list. Any items to discuss? Not seeing any. Nothing was pulled from the information package, I don't believe. And no items for information or public notices. And that brings us to the end of the regular meeting of council and committee of the whole. On behalf of council, thank you for everyone who watched online through the interruption, and looking for one more motion to adjourn. Councillor Cadeau. Councillor Bryant, all in favor? Oh. We have a question, sorry.
Sorry, more of a comment, Chair Schwindt. I just, as we were speaking, I pulled up the 2025 capital budget just to look up the St. Jacobs Arena project that you were asking about. That St. Jacobs Arena project with the grants was actually in 2026. So it wasn't budgeted to be completed in 2026. We did apply for the grant. So not doing that project won't have a savings for 2025. We can still look at the other.
That's good information to have. Thank you. With that, we did have a motion on the floor to adjourn. All in favor? We're adjourned. Good night, everyone.